our prior month's meeting from earlier in May. It's May 25th, 6 p.m., and I'd like to welcome all of you in attendance. The purpose for tonight's meeting is to hear our county manager's recommended budget for this fiscal year 21-22. The agenda for tonight will be to hear our county manager's presentation, ask probably some limited questions for him tonight if we have any, and then we'll dig into more depth as we move forward. And I'm sure we're going to be setting dates for future meetings where we can have further discussions and questions. I would like to remind you as commissioners that we pay our county manager. This is probably one of his biggest tasks of the year. He knows our county government in and out, and this is his recommendation for running the county moving forward. If you have any questions as you read through this, I encourage you to contact our county manager and ask him. And sure, if he can't answer it, he'll send you on to the department head. They'll help you find an answer. So Josh, I know this is your first budget that you worked through as a county commissioner. I would suggest that you and Derek go to lunch. If you have any questions on there, I think my first one, I just took a highlighter and some tabs and I went through and I made a lot of notes because there was a lot of symbols and emojis and different things in there that I had no clue what it was for and where the money goes. But after some quick explanations, it started to make sense. Looking forward to your thoughts on it and see what kind of questions you have. And again, if Derek can't answer, I don't know who can, but we'll try and find you and lead you in the right direction. So with that being said, any other comments? Call our county manager forward and let him provide his 5-minute budget message. Welcome, Derek.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Board. It's just a touch longer than 5 minutes, but nonetheless, I will make every attempt to go through this as quick as we can. But I do want to be aware and focus in on this budget and kind of highlight the high points as we go through and look at fiscal year 22. I would like to thank Lori Carpenter and her staff in finance for the excellent job that they always do in putting this budget together. I'd like to thank the department heads that are here in the audience tonight. The sheriff, Tammy, that's here from the county. This budget is a product of the hard work of the employees of this organization, and it is an honor for me to stand up here and be a spokesperson for this budget. When we look at the fiscal year 21-22 budget at $54,641,096 and compare that to what we saw last year in fiscal year 21, it's about a 4.5% or roughly $2.4 million increase over the fiscal year 21 original budget. When you look at it compared to fiscal year 20, it's a 2.6% increase. And I do that very purposefully because, as you'll all recall, going back to fiscal year 21, that was not a normal year. This time last year, heading into the fiscal year 21 budget, we were anticipating substantial revenue shortfalls as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we adjusted accordingly for that. In anticipation of those decreased revenues, we decreased expenditures in proportion, and in doing so, had a budget there at fiscal year 21 that was about $1 million less than the budget that we originally proposed in fiscal year 20. In mid-year, at our February 12th meeting, we had a budget amendment, as you'll recall, as we progressed through the uncertainty that accompanied the COVID-19 pandemic and things started coming to light. Revenue forecast improved dramatically. So that enabled us to come back here at mid-year and revise this budget by $1.72 million. And in doing so, we were able to largely restore the capital funding, which was omitted from the fiscal year 21 original budget. So when you look at these comparisons, I want you to know that the fiscal year 21 budget, with that revision alone, would have brought that budget from $52,302,445 to $54,029,445. Now, with that revised budget, that is only 1% or about $600,000 less than the budget that we're proposing here tonight. So although it is a $2.3 million increase, $2.4 million increase from the original 21 budget, That does not represent a windfall of new revenue. What this budget's representative of here tonight is this organization returning to a normal pre-pandemic level, if you will. It's going to allow us to continue providing a high level of service at the current level, as well as it's going to enable us to maintain our strong financial position. Unassigned fund balance here in the fiscal year 22 budget will increase by approximately $2.15 million in the coming fiscal year. This is a combination of underspending the budget and revenues coming in higher than expected. Now, 21, unlike other years, as you'll recall, we had the federal COVID relief funding that poured into the fiscal year 21 budget. Macon County's received approximately $1.56 million in CARES Act funding, and through April 19th, we've spent approximately $1,124,000 of this CARES Act money to help us offset those expenses that were related to COVID-19. What I want you to mention here is that this fund balance increase is not an anomaly. It's not unique to Macon County. Every local government across the state of North Carolina saw a fund balance increase in fiscal year 21. I would venture to say the vast majority, just like the school system. And that directly goes back to this influx of COVID-19 funding, combined with organizations that did the same thing we did. We braced for the worst, and thank God we got the best. So that's a combination of that. Our fund balance is not the only fund balance that has grown, and it's really representative of what we saw across the state. This projected $27.6 million in fund balance, it'll leave us prepared for unexpected emergencies as we head into fiscal year 22, in addition to providing us with the means to accomplish prioritized capital projects. And I want to underscore that word prioritized, because we've discussed many projects in the current fiscal year and highlighted that fund balance could be a potential source of revenue for those projects. But it will be very important that we prioritize these projects over years and select those most important to move forward with. Because we have to remember, as Commissioner Beal says many times, this fund balance is our seed corn. It's taken a long time to build this reserve fund to this level, and we must not forget that this fund balance is a key component. It is a staple in the strong financial position that this organization enjoys. There is no better example of how this fund balance works than when you go back to March 25th, 2021, when we issued $19.3 million, when we sold $19.3 million of bonds on March 25th. What did this fund balance do? Well, it enabled us to receive a rating from Moody's Investor Services of AA2. That is a very strong bond rating. It allowed us to receive a 1.9% true interest cost on the $9.5 million middle school renovation project. It allowed us to receive a 1.07% true interest cost on $9.8 million in loan refinancings that over the 14-year term of these refinancings is going to save the county an estimated $700,000. So that just goes to show you how that fund balance contributes directly to the strong financial position we enjoy. We must also remember that another contributor to this AA2 credit rating is our excellent track record of paying off our debt. Currently, the county has an outstanding debt amount of approximately $33.48 million. Of this $33.48 million, 32.38, or approximately 97% of that, 32.38 million, or 97% of that, is attributable to school projects. The remainder is attributable to Town of Franklin sewer line extension projects. So this organization, Macon County as an organization, has no outstanding debt. While principal and interest payments here will decrease slightly in the coming fiscal year, we will see them increase in fiscal year 23 by approximately $362,000 as the first principal and second interest payment on the Macon Middle School renovation project comes due. The most fascinating thing to me about our ability to continue providing the services we provide here at Macon County, complete the projects that we've completed, and retain our solid financial position is the fact that we've been able to do this while maintaining the third lowest property tax rate in the state of North Carolina. And a unique aspect of local government organizations like Macon County is the fact that all Macon County taxpayers are both consumers of this organization as well as shareholders in this organization. And looking back at fiscal year 21, from a consumer standpoint, whether you look at our COVID-19 mitigation effort in Macon County in percent vaccinated per capita is in the top 10% of all counties in North Carolina for the percent of the population vaccinated per capita. And that is due to a first-class COVID-19 mitigation effort that's led on the front lines by those men and women in our health department and in our emergency medical services. I was at the Chamber of Commerce banquet on Friday night, and both of those agencies received the Above and Beyond Award for that first-class mitigation effort that they led on the front lines. Aside from the mitigation effort on the front lines, Macon County, through the height of the COVID-19 pandemic in fiscal year 21, we remained open for business. There was municipalities, and I used to send Jim the emails that I was getting coming across the listserv of these towns and counties. When are you going to open your offices? When are you going to open your offices? And this was going on into the middle of April, that counties and municipalities were sending this on the listserv, trying to get some feedback on when to open offices. Macon County, through a tremendous effort of all departments, not just those on the front lines, but all departments, we remained open for business during fiscal year 21. We moved forward with critical infrastructure projects. We moved forward with broadband expansion projects. We moved forward with renovations at our schools. And we did all this. I do not know anywhere, looking back over fiscal year 21, that I could have gotten better bang for my buck than the 37.47 cents on $100 of property value that I pay here in Macon County. So from a consumer standpoint, looking back at fiscal year 21 and what this organization's been able to do, I'm extremely satisfied as a consumer. As a shareholder of this organization, I can rest easy each night knowing that I'm investing this 37.47 cents on 100 in a AA2 rated organization. So now that we've looked at kind of gotten an overall picture of the fiscal year 22 budget, let's look a little closer at the revenues or what's going into that budget. With all signs pointing to a rebounding economy in the coming fiscal year, revenue projections for fiscal year 22 rebounded to pre-pandemic levels. It's going to enable this organization to continue providing the high level of public service to the Macon County citizens, while also making much needed organizational improvements. Ad valorem property tax here at $30.7 million accounts for 56%, or the largest revenue source in the fiscal year 22 budget. Sales tax at $10.5 million, or 19% of total revenue, will account for the second largest revenue source in fiscal year 22. Here you see service fees at 7%, right around $3.93 million. Those are the fees that are associated with things like your recreational fees, your ambulance fees, your client payments for health and social services, your building permit fees, and the like. Intergovernmental revenues at $8.9 million. These revenues are spoken for. They're offset, they're married to an expenditure somewhere on that side of the budget. This is pass-through money that comes from the state and federal government, in addition to your PILT payment. This is the payment in lieu of taxes. The federal government, owning about 50% of our county, they get the best bang for their buck of any taxpayer because they own 50% of the county and they pay us about $360,000 a year for it. So that, along with those other pass-through revenues, is reflected in your intergovernmental revenues here at 17% of the budget in fiscal year 22. Lastly, miscellaneous revenues at 1% of the budget. Those are things like your rental fees, your administrative fees, but 97% of the revenue in this miscellaneous portion of the budget is our interest on investments. That's where that we draw interest on our investments here in Macon County. So let's look a little bit closer at the increases that we're seeing in the revenue line items heading into fiscal year 22. When you look at the ad valorem tax revenue here, that will be reflected in the tax collections pieces of the pie that we just discussed. We're going to see about a $500,000 increase in our ad valorem tax revenue. This increase in revenue is due to a combined increase in the collection percentage of 1.05%, in addition to a combined increase in value of roughly $50.58 million in fiscal year 22. As you'll recall, in fiscal year 21, in the economic uncertainty that accompanied fiscal year 21 heading into that budget, we reduced our ad valorem tax collection rate by 1% in anticipation of COVID-19 impacting individuals' ability to pay their ad valorem property tax. Of course, we did not see that, much like every other aspect of the budget. That did not happen. So we are adjusting that tax rate back up accordingly and in line with prior year levels. The tax rate at 37.47 cents on 100 is reflective of no increase to our current ad valorem tax rate. Sales tax is going to be, your motor vehicle tax will increase slightly there by $50,689. Sales tax is ironically, 1 year ago today, we sat in this room, or not today, but about 1 year ago, this month, we sat in this room and discussed sales tax. And ironically, it was going to be the revenue source that we felt took the greatest hit in fiscal year 21. However, we just did not see that. In fiscal year 21, we budgeted sales tax in the original budget at $500,000 less than the fiscal year 20 original budget. But moving forward, as the economy has rebounded, we have budgeted sales tax here, and it's going to account for the primary source of your revenue growth. So how do we budget sales tax? You budget it's two pieces. First of all, we got to budget what we think we're going to end fiscal year 21 with. Sales tax are collected 4 months in arrears. So when we put this budget together, we compare what we have seen thus far in fiscal year 21, we had through January at the time we put this budget together, and we look at what we had in fiscal year 20 and compare the growth of what we're seeing in 21 compared to 20. And then we'll project, based on that, what we're going to finish the year with. So from January through June, we'll project that out. What we saw through January was a 19.4% growth rate in sales tax over fiscal year 20 actuals. So in looking at the remaining months, and just real quickly, the 2 months that were the lowest percent increase over fiscal year 20 actuals were during the height of the pandemic. They were in July and August. And in those months, we saw a growth rate in sales tax of 12.32% in July, 12.05% in August, and then in September, it just took off. We had a 17.02% growth over 20 actuals in September, 23.3% growth in October, 19.6% growth in November, 21.9% growth in December, and 33.12% growth in January over fiscal year 20 actuals. So what we did was we looked there at we were 19.4%. We received guidance from the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners, as well as the North Carolina General Assembly's Fiscal Research Division, that was anticipating the majority of North Carolina counties to finish the year at around 10.3% sales tax growth over fiscal year 20. But that trend was just not reflected here in Macon County. We were much higher than that, and they did have a caveat in those projections that many rural counties that were less dependent on commercial property values are going to see increases above this state average of 10.3%. So what we did, looking at those actuals, knowing that no increase that we have saw has been less than 12%, we budgeted 10% on those months of January, February, March, April, May, June to finish fiscal year 21. That gave us a total sales tax increase of 15.8% in fiscal year 21 over fiscal year 20 actuals. That's about 1.39 million. That 15.8% equates to about 1.39 million over fiscal year 20 actuals. Second part to budgeting sales tax is we have to anticipate what we're going to receive in growth during fiscal year 22. And much like previous years, as things have returned to normal, we're going to budget a 3% growth rate on top of what we finish fiscal year 21 with, 10.2 million. We're going to budget 3% growth on top of that, and that'll generate an additional $306,214 in sales tax revenue during fiscal year 22. So although that is that 2.4 million, that is a large number. Keep in mind, one, we had to dig out of a hole from the depressed level that we budgeted at in 21, and we've had a very favorable experience thus far in 21, and that's anticipated to continue moving forward into 22. Service fees here at $97,750 increase. That is representative of service fees being budgeted at FY20 actual levels. But going back to 21, and again with COVID-19 and the anticipated economic decline, we budgeted service fees at 10% less than fiscal year 19 actuals in anticipation of that everything was going to cut off. Of course, that didn't happen. It went the other way, much like sales tax and everything else. But this is, again, illustrative of us returning to normal pre-pandemic levels in the service fee revenue line item. Intergovernmental revenue at $47,818. It is what it is. That increase is tied in revenue is tied to an expenditure somewhere in the operating budget that's funded through federal or state money. Miscellaneous revenue, as I said earlier, 97% of that revenue source is going to be our interest on investments. And as interest rates remain at historic lows, we anticipate that portion of the budget to decline in revenue by about $115,500 in the coming fiscal year. Looking at fund balance, there is no appropriation of fund balance in fiscal year 22. Unlike fiscal year 21, this was another avenue that we took to insulate ourselves from economic uncertainty and to allow this organization to continue moving forward in the anticipated decline in our revenue sources. We appropriated $702,312 in the fiscal year 21 budget to allow us to move forward and complete those mission-critical capital projects, those that we just couldn't do without. And as you will recall, that is what was budgeted in the fiscal year 21 budget. It will be reduced from the 22 budget because there's been no fund balance appropriated in the recommended budget. So now that we've looked at the revenues and what's going into the fiscal year 22 budget, let's briefly look at the expenditures in the operating budget. Expenditures contained in the recommended budget are going to allow us to accomplish the goals that were set forth by this Board of Commissioners for FY22 at our budget work session. If you look here at expenditures in the general fund operating budget, I can assure you that with the proposed level expenditures, we will be able to maintain a current level of service. We will be able to address compensation issues within the organization. Going back to that February 12th budget work session, the board appropriated $150,000 for Macon County to contract with a firm to look at our pay scale and address any compensation and classification issues within that pay scale. We'll be able to maintain a solid financial position, as we've previously discussed, and there will be, again, no increase to the ad valorem tax rate. Consistent with previous years, you can see from the layout of these expenditures here in this graph, consistent with previous years, we're going to focus our priority areas in this budget are going to be on public safety and education at 27% and 19% respectively. Human services, while it accounts for 24% of the expenditures in the operating budget, you have to remember that our social services department, the senior services department, and the health department account for about $12,337,000 of that $12.9 million. And of that, only about $4.6 million is representative of county-funded expenditures. That's where you can really see, as I was saying earlier when we were discussing the intergovernmental revenues, that's where you see those intergovernmental revenues come to play. While that's a $12.9 million expenditure by function there, that $8.9 million goes to offset a lot of that, leading to county contribution only being around $4 million. As with any public service organization, the majority of your expenditures are going to be directed toward compensating those individuals that provide the public service. And expenditures related to employee salary and benefits in the fiscal year 22 recommended budget will account for approximately $20.8 million. We first here want to talk about our health insurance. For the first time in a long time, our health insurance rates have remained flat in fiscal year 22. And this is largely due to our decision back in fiscal year 19 to join the North Carolina Health Insurance Risk Pool. As you'll recall, that allowed this organization to retain its self-funded health insurance structure. And instead of having just us out here on an island of 600 employees and dependents that were on the plan, joining that North Carolina Health Insurance Risk Pool that's comprised of 15 local governments containing over 10,000 members allowed us to substantially reduce our exposure and thereby drive down costs. The year before we joined the fiscal year 18, the year before joining the North Carolina Health Insurance Risk Pool, we experienced an increase to health insurance premium of 24.9%. The year following our membership, we experienced an increase of 10%. The next year, 4%, and now it's flat. We experienced no increase in fiscal year 22. Another benefit of joining this health insurance risk pool is that by getting our contribution to where it needs to be, revenues have constantly exceeded expenditures. Revenues going into the fund are the county contribution that we make to employees, as well as the employee contribution, those with dependents that they make. That's how the revenue goes into the fund. The expenditures are largely the claims that come out of that fund. So year after year, we have now been able, since joining this risk pool, to build our reserve fund in the health insurance account to about $1.3 million. And why this is so important is it enables us to, if we do have a bad exposure year, a bad experience, then we can simply go into that fund and offset any rate increases rather than passing those rate increases down to the employee. So that's very crucial. And from fiscal year 17 through 19, prior to our joining the North Carolina Health Insurance Risk Pool, we had to come out of the general fund in this 3-year span we had to come out $1.8 million in revenue from the general fund just to put into the health insurance fund to keep it solvent. So we're very excited about the flat health insurance rates, and that again was just an excellent decision that this organization made in fiscal year 19 by joining that risk pool. We have an increase to retirement contribution. The North Carolina, our friends at the North Carolina retirement system are requiring a 1% increase to retirement contribution across the board. This is a cost that's going to be incurred not only by Macon County, but every organization that's a member of the North Carolina retirement system. That's going to equate to about $196,000 in an operating budget increase. Lastly, there will be $1.23 million appropriated here. That will be reflected at this time in an increase to your non-departmental portion of the budget. Going back to that mid-year budget work session, when we were authorized to spend the money to contract with a firm to come in here and look at our pay scale, we have and continue to work on doing that. And that has been, these funds have been earmarked in the operating budget. What we've saw is, as the economy continues to improve, your wages increase, so does the level of competition between many organizations to recruit and retain qualified employees. As of May 12, 2021, Macon County had 50 vacant positions spread across numerous departments within this organization. The majority of these vacancies lie in those priority areas of the budget that provide critical services to Macon County citizens. When you look at our health and human services function in the budget, 7 vacancies in public health, 11 vacancies in Department of Social Services. Looking at that public safety function, you have 7 vacancies in EMS, 1 vacancy in telecommunications, and 12 vacancies in the sheriff's office. Again, these provide critical services to the citizens of Macon County. And addressing this urgent situation was a primary goal that was established by the commissioners for this fiscal year 22 budget. On February 24th, we began working with Gallagher Consulting to perform this compensation and classification study. The purpose of this project was to design and implement a market-aligned pay structure that would be effective in the recruitment process, as well as maintain the internal equity within our pay scale that would go towards aiding us in retaining those qualified employees. We established a committee of county employees to work alongside Gallagher to perform this study. These employees consist of the DSS director, the health director, emergency management director, the sheriff, the solid waste director, human resources director, the finance director, director of information technology, and myself. And while this study, we have not received the complete study yet, we continue to work on it. We have received preliminary results from Gallagher that show Macon County's salary range for 77 benchmark positions that are a cross-section and represent all functions within this operating budget to be on average 7 to 9% below market levels when compared to a peer group of 22 similar counties and municipalities. So we're setting that $1.23 million aside. It will be used to implement these recommendations once the full study is complete, and we've had a chance, as our internal committee has had a chance to review it, clear up any inconsistencies, answer any questions we have, and we anticipate being able to implement that late summer of fiscal year 21. Want to make one thing, want to highlight one point here, that although that the exact cost is unknown at this time, when you take the bottom end of what they're saying in the preliminary projections, 7 to 9% below market level, when you take that 7% and you apply it to the $20.8 million in salary and benefits that comprises the organization's payroll, then that's going to equal about $1.45 million, which is about $227,000 above what we have earmarked here. While the earmarked amount is less than what we're preliminarily seeing, we do remain confident that funding in this amount, which we're proposing to be set aside, will be sufficient to address the majority of compensation issues within the organization, thereby helping this organization with recruiting and retaining qualified employees. In addition to salary and benefits in the operating budget, you have your non-salary and benefit related operating cost. This is the expenditures that the people providing the services, this is the tools they need to do their job. You see things right here on your screen, such as telephone, printing and advertising, equipment, operating supplies, computer supplies, office supplies, uniforms. These are primary non-salary and benefit related operating costs. And while, I've put here, you'll see 5 years, starting with fiscal year 18 through fiscal year 22. And there is no numbers to this because it is intended just to show you, to illustrate that while demand for our services has increased since fiscal year 18, what we're actually operating at with respect to these primary non-salary and benefit related operating costs at $2.5 million in fiscal year 22 is $156,000 below what we were operating at in fiscal year 18. And how do we do that? Well, the answer's simple. It is the hard work and dedication of these department heads. They continue to find efficiency at every turn. They continue to pursue new and innovative things within each of their budgets that allow them not only to become more efficient, but to avoid future costs. And in doing so, that is how we have continued and will continue to operate. Capital expenditures within the operating budget, they're those expenditures that exceed $5,000 and they have a useful life of greater than 1 year. In fiscal year 22, capital expenditures will account for approximately $2.88 million, or 5.3% of the general fund budget. This is an increase of $726,184 over the current fiscal year original budget. Now, going back, in fiscal year 21, capital was that area where we reduced everything. We brought everything out in capital and said, if we are going to take a hit and weather this storm, we would rather take a hit with respect to our equipment than with respect to our staff and with respect to having to send people home should a worst-case scenario occur. So much capital was omitted from the operating budget, aside from those mission-critical capital projects that we included. Here, this is a prime example of how, when you look at the county here in blue at 1.227 million, we're returning to normal. Capital expenditures are returning to normal in fiscal year 22. And this is reflective of that. The $505,348 here on FY 22, that is representative of grant-funded capital expenditures, $1.15 million to the schools, annual technology and capital outlay needs, and then that 1.227 to the county. That is in line and consistent with fiscal year 20, as you'll see down here, the last year pre-pandemic. So again, we are returning, not only with respect to the operating budget, but with the capital side of the budget as well, returning back to that pre-pandemic level. So now that we've looked at expenditures from a broad standpoint, let's look at them very quickly, a little bit closer. Let's look at them within each function. Let's start with public safety. At $14,976,000, that's representative of an $800,931 increase over fiscal year 21. As we get into each of these functions, it's important how this is laid out is increases to operations are going to be in blue, increases to capital are going to be in red. So any increase to the operating budget's in blue, capital expenditures are going to be listed in red. So you'll see here the retirement increase, again, going back about $200,000 across the organization. $90,000 of that increase is going to be incurred by the public safety function. Moving on down to emergency management, EMS, you can look in your budget notebook on page 16 to get an in-depth, detailed explanation of all capital that's included that we'll be discussing. But EMS, we purchased a new ambulance for we will purchase a new ambulance for $205,797, as well as the equipment at $102,500 to outfit that ambulance. Animal control will purchase new equipment as well. I think this is a new dog box, as well as a backup generator for the animal control shelter. In the sheriff's department here in detention center and courthouse security, we have an increase to the out-of-county housing line item at $55,000. The sheriff can tell you that's a moving target each year that fluctuates from year to year. But we feel, based on the trends we're seeing, an increase of $55,000 to that out-of-county housing line item, the cost that it takes for us to house inmates outside of the Macon County Detention Center will suffice as we move into fiscal year 22. Concealed permits, this is concealed handgun permits. We have saw a increase in the demand for concealed handgun permits in fiscal year 21, and we anticipate that to continue into fiscal year 22. While there is a $28,000 increase to expenditures, people pay for these handgun permits, so you'll see an offsetting revenue as well that accompanies that $28,000 increase in expenditures. Detention center, $157,500 has been budgeted, which will allow us to replace all the water fixtures in the detention center. This is something that Department of Health and Human Services comes in annually, performs an inspection of our detention center, and have cited us for numerous years that those fixtures need to be replaced. We've used them as long as we can, and it's time that they be replaced in this fiscal year. 4 patrol vehicles here at $140,080, as well as data storage. That goes to, as you'll recall, over the last 2 budget years, we have upfitted our sheriff's department with in-car and body cameras. The footage from these cameras needs to have a secure, large capacity storage. This will accomplish that and has been budgeted at $20,869. So when we go over our capital increases here at about $173,000, combined with the increase in capital, going back to your fiscal year 21 budget original, there was no capital at all included for public safety. So those two, just going over those items right there, more than make up for that $800,000 increase in fiscal year 22. Moving on to our general government function. General government function here is projected to decrease by $468,334 from fiscal year 21. This is largely, this is with the increase in retirement of $35,193 in this function. The decrease is primarily attributable to capital in the general government function. Going back to fiscal year 21, those mission-critical capital projects, one of them happened to be in tax assessment, completing the installation of our 40-year-old tax software with new software. That was included in fiscal year 21, as well as infrastructure upgrades to our information technology department. That was included in there as well. So the capital cost decrease here at $502,620 is the primary reason that this function decreased by $432,000. And you can see that here. This is just to point out tax assessment. You're going to see a $376,529 decrease within that department of the general government function. And following the completion of the IT infrastructure upgrades, you're going to see $127,000 drop off there in information technology. Moving into transportation. Transportation at $1.49 million in fiscal year 22, you'll see a $33,520 increase over the fiscal year 21 original budget. That does include a $5,014 increase to retirement. And going back to fiscal year 21 again, and I've listed it here, transit was, as you'll recall, we had grant funding for these transit expenditures in fiscal year 21, so we went ahead and included them in the original budget. You have one transit bus in fiscal year 21, and while $77,665 is the total cost, we have to carry that total cost in our operating budget, but we're only required to match 10% of that cost at $10,890. Same thing with the facility expansion for transit at $418,560. That'll be the cost that's reflected in the budget, whereas we were only responsible for $83,712, or 20% of that total cost of the expansion. So that brought your total capital here in fiscal year 21 to around $500,000. Moving into fiscal year 22, we have 7 transit vans at a cost of $518,615. While that will be carried in the operating budget, a 10% county match is what we'll be responsible for at $51,861. We'll have furniture that is associated with the transit facility expansion. At a 10% match for that, it's $42,882, but we'll only be responsible for $4,288. But carrying forward, as we have to carry forward the entire cost in the budget, that increase in capital right there in transit is going to be make up that. That is why the transit function increased over fiscal year 21. Again, going back to that capital. Why isn't the expansion in the budget? The expansion is still, we are still continuing, moving forward with the transit facility expansion. What you have here is a multi-year project that we're in the process, we're in the planning phase, we're incurring cost on this project, and we'll continue to incur cost throughout the remainder of this year. So we do not know how much until June 30th that we will need to move forward into fiscal year 22. So when those expenditures for 21 are complete and we know what we move forward on the transit facility expansion into 22, the budget will be amended to reflect that later in this fiscal year. Economic and physical development at $538,340 is representative of a $17,390 decrease from fiscal year 21. That does include the increase to retirement there of $1,032. But the reason this particular function in the budget decreased, we had a contracted services decrease at Cowee School of $18,000. They were able to pick up half of the cost of contracted services through a grant. So we were very excited to see that, and we look forward to continuing our work with Cowee School in fiscal year 22. Human services at $12,900,000. It's going to be a $248,341 increase over fiscal year 21. As you can see here, $60,403 will come in the way of an increase to retirement contributions within this function. Within the health department, we have budgeted for 2 vehicles, replacements in on-site wastewater and private drinking water wells. There will be 2 Ford F-150s at $34,000 apiece, bringing it to $68,000 increase in capital in the health department's budget. The health department didn't have any capital in fiscal year 21 original, so that's going to be an increase, along with $242,646 in COVID-19 grants that we received mid-year during the year in fiscal year 21. Thus, they will not be reflected in your 21 original budget. However, they will be reflected as we got to those remained unspent, so we will carry those forward into fiscal year 22. Recreation here at 2.8. Recreation here at 2.8 million is a $200,000 increase from fiscal year 21. That's going to be with a retirement increase of $5,231. We are going to purchase a new vehicle within the rec department, as well as partner with Highlands, the town of Highlands, to light the Highlands ball field. That was a request that came from the mayor. They're going to be replacing the lights at the Highlands ball field with Musco LED lights. $127,500 is representative of half of that total project cost in fiscal year 22. When you look at non-capital, property and buildings and maintenance, these are all line items within the recreation department's operating budget. You're going to see increases to these line items because, as you'll recall last year, recreation, we moved the maintenance responsibility at the Greenway, the maintenance responsibility at all the ball fields. We moved that from maintenance into the rec department. So you're going to see these increases here in non-capital for things such as to replace mowers and purchase new mowers and weed eaters at $5,000. Property and building improvements, we started with resurfacing of the tennis courts at the recreation park. We were able to amend the budget and do one of those, get one of those going in this fiscal year, and they're $15,000 apiece. We have 3 tennis courts that are made up of 2 courts each, so we got 3 sets of 2. Do 1 in fiscal year 21, which we're doing now, complete 1 in fiscal year 22, which is budgeted for here, and we will complete 1 in fiscal year 23. Maintenance, again, this comes back, there'll be a $10,000 increase here, and this is directly related to the Greenway improvements, since Recreation's taking ownership and responsibility for maintenance of the Greenway and upkeep at the ball fields, as well as improvements to the Greenway. We will also see, we will use this increase in funding to repaint our pool. So that brings you right to that $200,000 increase in the recreation and cultural function of this budget. Public education, as we move into fiscal year 21, or excuse me, fiscal year 22, our local funding for the Macon County school systems, we will continue to place, as I stated earlier, a top priority on our Macon County school system. Local funding for operations and teacher supplement is being recommended to remain at $8,732,731. That is consistent with the prior year level of funding. While this level of funding is consistent with the prior year, we're going to see a decrease in average daily membership of 34 students to 4,454 in fiscal year 22. And as this happens, that is going to increase our local current expense funding per ADM from $19.46 in fiscal year 21 to $19.61 in fiscal year 22. And as you can see in the orange bar on this graph here, the proposed funding level for the school system, current expense, is above the fiscal year 21 average for the state at $1,958, as well as the fiscal year 21 average for the region at $1,641 per ADM. And these figures were derived from the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners Budget and Tax Survey for fiscal year 21. I'd like to make a point here. Since fiscal year 18, our funding for current expense and teacher supplements has increased by $1,115,000, or 14.6%. The revenue to sustain this increase, as you will recall, was generated through a 1.8 cent tax increase in fiscal year 20. The school system has requested $1.6 million in additional funding for personnel-related expenses in fiscal year '22 in the current expense budget. Although this request has not been included in the recommended budget, it does not appear at the time that this budget was presented that this will adversely impact the current level of service provided by the Macon County School System. Furthermore, I feel like that an increase of this magnitude into an area that is the responsibility of the state of North Carolina is not a decision that can be made unilaterally by administration absent the direction of the Board of County Commissioners. There are things with respect to current expense that are not going to be included in these numbers here. They're not going to be reflected on this chart here, but there was a request for 5 additional school nurse positions in the fiscal year '22 budget. We will continue, as we have year in and year out. There is $350,000 that you will find in the Health Department's budget for fiscal year '22 to continue our administration of the school nurse program. The school nurse program currently has 5 nurses that yield a nurse-to-student ratio of 1 nurse to 898 students. That will be at the projected FY '22 ADM, that ratio. In fiscal year '20, the state of North Carolina released the Department of Health and Human Services reported the average across the state of North Carolina, the average nurse-to-student ratio was 1 to 1,000. So moving into fiscal year '22, as we continue to have this in the budget here, we will still be providing the school nurse services at a higher level than we're seeing across the state. In addition, there are 2 bills that are currently proposed, House Bill 347 and House Bill 348. They're currently introduced in the House of Representatives. This would place a public school nurse in every school across the state of North Carolina at an estimated annual cost of $102 million in annual recurring funds. In light of these aforementioned circumstances, again, the request for 5 additional school nurse positions has not been included in the FY '22 recommended budget. In addition to school nurses that are not reflected here, you're also not going to see the school resource officers reflected here. Safety has and continues to be a top priority for Macon County, and it will continue to be in fiscal year '22. Like the school nurse program, the school resource officer program, again, is not reflected here, but annually in Macon County's budget, we budget approximately $650,000 a year to ensure that every school in the Macon County school system has at least 1 SRO position. Currently, there are 12 school resource officers in the Macon County SRO program, 11 which are funded directly through the Sheriff's Department, and 1 which is funded through the town of Highland, the officer is from the town of Highlands, but it is funded through a $50,000 annual appropriation from Macon County. The school system requested 10 additional mental health professionals in the fiscal year '22 budget as well. This would be a recurring cost of $820,893. This would bring the total number of mental health professionals in the school system to 20, according to the fiscal year '22 budget request submitted by the school system. While this has not been included in the fiscal year '22 recommended budget, access to mental health services to students will improve in the coming fiscal year following action at the state and continued action at the local level. At the time of this budget message, Senate Bill 161, primary sponsor Senator Kevin Corbin, it has been included in the state budget. It appropriates $1 million from the general fund to the Department of Health and Human Services to expand the existing statewide telepsychiatry program into our public schools. This bill will go into effect July 1st, 2021, and it will help students across Western North Carolina get access to the mental health services they need. At the local level, Macon County, we recently received notification that funding will again be awarded from the Office of Rural Health in fiscal year '22 that is going to allow for the continuation of the school-based health center. The health department, through this grant, provides our schools with 2 full-time behavioral health specialist positions and a contracted nurse practitioner to assist with preventative care and behavioral health services for our students. In addition to current expense, let's talk about capital outlay. Technology and capital outlay will be restored in the fiscal year '22 budget to $1,150,000. Since fiscal year '18, the technology and capital outlay appropriation has increased by $550,000 or 92%. At the projected FY22 ADM of 4,454, you'll see the annual capital outlay appropriation here is representative of about $258 per ADM on this graph. That is well above the fiscal year 21 state and regional average of $166 per ADM and $174 per ADM respectively. Again, these numbers were derived from the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners fiscal year 21 budget and tax survey. In addition to the annual technology and capital outlay appropriation, Macon County makes the annual principal and interest payment on $32,387,000 in outstanding school debt. In fiscal year 21, the debt service payment on the Macon County school projects were $3,422,000. Fiscal year 23, this annual debt service, and that's not going to be reflected in these numbers here either. In fiscal year 23, upon the first principal and second interest payment of the Macon Middle School renovation project coming due, the debt service payment is going to increase to $3.874 million in fiscal year 23. Like the county, I think we're anticipating in fiscal year 22 to receive approximately $6.95 million in additional COVID relief funds. The school system will continue to receive COVID relief funds in fiscal year 22 as well. The elementary and secondary school emergency relief fund, much like the CARES Act funding that has ran through our budget, it was established to address the impact that COVID-19 has and continues to have on elementary and secondary schools across the nation. Macon County has received approximately $5.8 million through rounds 1 and 2 of ESSER funding and is projected to receive $10.5 million in round 3 following the General Assembly's appropriation of these funds. So I say all that to say our commitment to public education in Macon County has and will continue to remain strong heading into fiscal year 22. So in summary, I know this is the slide we've all been looking for, so it's here. So let's look at, I know we've jumped around a lot. I wanted to make the most out of you gentlemen's time and get through this thing as quick as we could and highlight the major increases and decreases within the operating budget. But let's just look at it. Let's look at a summary real quick. What does this budget do? We received a total revenue increase of $2.338 million. And I said from the beginning, what does that do? That gets us back to a current level of service, pre-pandemic. There is no windfall of new revenue in this budget. So what did we do with that $2.338 million? We increased our capital spending to a pre-pandemic level, as you saw in the chart, consistent with what we spent in FY20. We're proposing to increase the salaries to a market level for county employees. We had a retirement increase of approximately $200,000 that was simply unavoidable. We restored things like the community funding pool that took a reduction in fiscal year 21. We brought that back up to a pre-pandemic level. As you'll recall, mid-year at the budget work session on February 12th, our DSS department came in here and they were requesting a DSS social work supervisor position in response to the ever-growing demand that we're seeing within that department. We honored that request. It was not reflected in the fiscal year 21 original budget. However, it will now be reflected in the fiscal year 22 budget, an additional $100,000. We discussed things like concealed handgun permits. Again, we saw demand increase. This increase is unavoidable to the expenditure side, and it is offset by recurring revenue, at $28,000 there. Out of county housing, another unavoidable operating expense. Moving target every year. We feel like looking at the trends right now, that $55,000 will be sufficient to carry us forward in fiscal year 22. So when we look at the $2.338 million in revenue, and we've just discussed the $2.375 million in expenditures, which is more than that revenue covers, and other areas have been reduced in the operating budget to compensate for that, of course, just goes to show you that this budget returns us to a current pre-pandemic level. In doing so, in maintaining that current level of service, we've also maintained our solid financial position. We've addressed the compensation issues within the organization, and we've proposed no increase as requested by the board at the February work session to the ad valorem tax rate of 37.47 cents on the 100. So with that, gentlemen, I appreciate your time, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that anyone has. And if I can't, I know a woman that can.
Mr. Manager, great job as usual. It's very clear and concise, and I believe every year you're getting better and better at handling this. The way your mind rolls through these numbers and keeps up with everything is extremely impressive. So with that being said, I know there's going to be some questions, and the more we dig into your budget, this is the first time we've seen it, there'll be more and more questions to arise. So let my fellow commissioners ask some questions if they have any now. If not, we probably need to take some time to discuss some other items and maybe some further budget meetings for further review.
Mr. Mayor, just make sure I understand on the fund balance.
Yes, sir.
You said our fund balance was 27,632 there approximately.
That's what we're projecting to end fiscal year, projected to end
Projected. So,
fiscal year
and if
21.
we
Not
project
final.
that out, we can only, for those who don't know, many years ago, this board said we'd always have a 25%. We must have 8%. That's the law. And many years ago, this board passed a resolution that would be 25%. So that leaves available estimated fund balance of around 13.9. Would that be, that would be a fair way to do that arithmetic?
Say that one more time.
All right, so you're projecting 27,632.
Uh-huh.
25% of that must stay in unless this board changes that, has got to stay in for, in the fund balance. It can't go below 25%.
Yeah, that is an informal policy that we've established previously.
That the board established, before any of
Yes,
us
sir.
are on this board.
Yes, sir.
So that would leave availability in the projected fund balance of around almost 14 million, is that correct?
Let me see here. If we say 14 million,
I don't have my projected expenditures in front of me. Do you have them?
14 million would be 25% of 54,641, so roughly thereabouts, yes.
Okay. And another thing, what have you heard from Peel? Money?
I hadn't got it this year.
It is in the Fed budget, but, we've always pushed for a line item and asked for a line item, and of course, it's there again, but that PILT money, it's scheduled to increase, but do we get it is the question. So you ain't got none yet.
Haven't received it this fiscal year.
So you didn't even make a projection or anything in the budget for that.
Well, yeah, we put it in next year's budget,
But I mean,
but no.
same thing as
Same
last year.
thing, yeah.
That's all I got, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Sheds, questions?
Continue to study.
Okay, Commissioner Young?
I've got several questions. Really, I'll ask a simple question. With some of the capital increases in the departments, like for instance, ambulances and patrol cars, does each department budget, replacement of these vehicles? Or is
Yes,
that
we
one
try to
big
do-
capital expense?
Yes, and they're like the ambulances, they're big capital expenditures, and we actually, the capital improvement plan that we adopted back in 2018, we have set aside each year with capital. We know that we're gonna look at spending $600,000 on vehicles to replace those vehicles that are most needed replacement. We've had transit in the garage have actually created a vehicle replacement system that allows us to rank each vehicle based on miles, based on usage, and see which vehicles requested by departments are those most needed replacement. So we use that ranking system combined with the capital improvement plan to really gauge and narrow down what vehicles need to be replaced.
Fair enough.
Yes, sir.
Good job, Derek. Good presentation. Excited that we don't see a increase in property taxes. We do need to keep in mind about the fire tax. Fire tax is, in essence, an extension of the property tax. It is a millage-based fee, and mine is 10% in Vernon Town, so it averages about 10%, I think, countywide. But we've got our fire book here somewhere, I think.
We have two departments requesting increases this year, and one of them is Burning Town The other is auto. Vernon Towns is a very, very minimal increase, which you'll see in there, and autos is a significant, and we'll have both of those departments come in at our next meeting and discuss their reasoning and present their case.
But looks like a good proposed budget. As I stated the other night, and in certain economic situation we're in now with taxes, et cetera, on the federal level, I think it's very wise of us to be frugal in our expenditures until we know what's coming down out of Washington. But thank you, and I look forward. I guess we set our
Work
next-
session, yeah.
A work session. Which will give us time to, it'll probably at least a week to review this, if not two. And then we need to have another work session to follow up on further questions. We need to meet with the two fire departments. And I've got a feeling with the Board of Education, Derek, or staff, I'm not sure,
We can do,
kind of go over,
Yeah.
presuming y'all want to, we normally do, because that's a huge line item.
I do have one question. The Gallagher consultant study, when will we be able to see that?
we're hoping by middle of August.
Okay, because in our meeting, we were in a meeting, Paul and I were in a meeting Sunday, and a group there was concerned about the law enforcement pay and things like that. And I think they're gonna be coming to our June the 8th meeting, and I think this Gallagher thing may be an enlightenment for them. Are you aware of what I'm talking about, Sheriff Holland?
I think he's talking about the young adults that
Yes.
that have been putting off coming, and they're aware that the county has been working on this, and that's why they've not come so far. But I don't know exactly when they're planning on coming anyway.
I believe it mentioned the other day, June 8th, not in abundance, but a couple would come and inquire about it. So I just think that Gallagher study, need to have our brain going to update them on what's in the package coming. And they're very
Yeah.
cognitive of what's going on. They're sharp
Right.
young.
And I think the sheriff, he can get in touch with them and let them know the date we intend on presenting that study.
Yeah, I'm in direct communication with them. They're wanting to come, they just, the work that they've done, they just don't want it to be forgotten that they had done that.
Right.
And they're looking forward to coming. It may not be June there when they come, it may be July, it may be August. But they're well aware of what you all are working on, or what we all are working on.
Does Gallagher give you regular updates, Derek? on
Yes,
your-
we have a weekly meeting.
Okay, so you might, this projection?
Yeah, that's just a
could change.
projection, yes. Certainly. Right now, they've actually given us the preliminary results, and this internal committee is actually reviewing that now. We've marked up a bunch of things that we have questions about that we're going to communicate back with them. So it's really a connection between us and Gallagher. We've really worked well with them. This internal group has really done a great job at looking over these things, and we're in constant communication with them.
So if that needs to move, if that number needs to move, we might know that by the work session or?
Right, yes, but at this time, we,
We don't want to rush it, we
that
want
was,
to get it
that,
right.
and that's one thing
Yeah.
about it.
You know.
We didn't want to rush it. We want to make sure that it goes to those positions that are in most need of getting up to market level. See, that's an average. That 7% is an average. Some positions are above market level. Some positions are right in line with the market. But you have some positions that are bringing that down, that are well below market average and could very likely be contributing to these vacancies and our ability to retain employees in
Yeah,
some
but
of those
over the
positions.
years, we've had these studies after study, this is the fourth one I know of.
Mhm.
And they none come up, we never appropriate enough money to cover it, that I know of. So this time we want to do that,
Right.
I think. I mean, if you're gonna have the study, but I really wish we could get the numbers before the budget.
Sure. And we were just, again, we were operating with this budget, we were operating within the revenue parameters that we had, and without going outside of those revenue parameters, that 1.23 million, and being able to continue operating at our current level in across all department functions, that was the most that we could set aside to earmark for that.
Understood.
You didn't mention cost of living.
We're hoping that we're gonna implement this salary study. And we have talked about setting aside an amount out of that, once we address those positions that are most below market and need to be brought up, to see how much money is remaining to give a cost of living out of that money as well.
Out of the money that's set aside. But if we don't get the results till August, and the budget takes effect in July,
We'll implement in August or September.
Yeah, we'll
Whenever we
implement in
get the
August.
because we'll have to get the final plan, bring it to y'all, you'll have to bless it.
See, we had the
Then-
money appropriated. The money's appropriated in the budget. All it's gonna be doing is moving from
Moving it
non-departmental
to all the departments. that
to all the
apply.
yeah,
departments.
but it's not a
No, it's not been divvied out to each department yet. It's earmarked in that non-departmental.
so there's not gonna be any increase until we get the
That's right.
You're right,
That's
so
right.
probably
So
September,
that falls
October,
into that.
whenever, yeah.
1 point whatever.
And there's enough monies in this budget to cover all those numerous employees you said we were short.
That's what the goal is. The goal is to take those funds and to apply them to where we need to apply them.
How many have you got short, Sheriff?
Actually 13. Those are, law enforcement. It's not secretary, it's not administrative positions, it's law enforcement.
We're gonna set a time to meet or think about it, or?
I think that's the next thing on the agenda. And so, Mr. Manager, just for reference, copies of your budget message can be found at all of our local libraries, Nantahala, Franklin, Highlands,
Yep.
as well as on maconnc.org.
Yep, and there'll be a
Correct.
copy in the,
Beginning tomorrow.
beginning tomorrow, and there'll be a copy in the courthouse.
Courthouse, at the reception desk.
And it will be online at our website as well.
Okay. We're
Now,
looking
is
at
Mike,
dates
is
to
the
meet
public
again.
hearing set for June 8th? Do you all want to meet before the public hearing?
That's, I just showed you a calendar. June
The
8th,
public hearing is currently set for June 8th.
what if we have to have another session?
It's fine. We don't have to adopt it, we just have to have the public hearing. We don't have to
Regular
adopt the
schedule- At a
budget.
regular scheduled meeting?
Yeah, we don't have to adopt the budget. It's got to be at least 10 days after it's,
But generally, you wanna have the proposed budget prior to a public hearing. Ideally, wouldn't it? I mean,
yeah, or you could take the comments from the public hearing and incorporate them into the budget. I know sometimes we've adopted the budget
and then that same night.
on the public hearing night.
Same night, yeah.
but-
jack it up.
But yeah,
So I just
We wanna
wanted to
meet
throw that
before-
out there. in
What would be
case-
your suggestion, to meet before it or after?
I would meet before it.
Okay, so that leaves us next week. I'm good.
What day, sir?
I spoke with Warren Cabe. He asked if we could please not meet on Tuesday. That's a very bad night for him. He wants to be here for the fire department discussion, so. Wednesday night, the 2nd.
You want to schedule the schools and fire departments?
I'm
or-
up for, definitely the two fire departments, Otto and Vernontown. Everything else is flat. I think we actually might have shown a couple decreases on those when I first glanced at it.
I think we
Is there anyone else we
certainly
need
need,
to speak with?
we're talking about the new high school. I mean, this is, I think the school certainly needs to be here.
We want the
And I'd
school
like to talk
board
about
here,
the
or who would you
school
like?
nurses too.
Thursday?
I'm good with Wednesday or Thursday.
Yeah,
Who
sure.
are we requesting to be here from the schools? Dr. Baldwin or the school board or?
Dr. Baldwin there saying,
Okay.
saying Thursday.
Thursday, yeah.
Thursday the
Sure.
3rd.
Okay,
Good it.
Thursday the 3rd.
You want to try it at 6 or we going before that?
Good. Josh, can you go earlier?
You tell me.
I'm good.
We've gone early before.
5 PM.
I believe it's even earlier than that sometimes, haven't we?
Oh, we made days out of it before when it was hot and contested, but
Guess it depends.
What,
Are you
at 3
gonna,
o'clock
are you
or
gonna
4
have one
o'clock?
session or another one after this?
I think we're gonna try and get it all done in one. The fire departments they'll take about 15 to 20 minutes each, and then the school, it'll probably take an hour to 2 hours, so it'll be no good. So,
Can we start at 3 o'clock?
Only start at
5
early.
o'clock.
3?
Three, I'm working.
Okay.
So that's tough on me. Probably 4 o'clock would be the earliest I could
4
start.
o'clock.
But I'm good if everybody else says 4 or 5.
Tell me.
I mean, it's gonna take a couple hours. We've stayed here till midnight on a regular meeting. Gary's gotta get in bed by dark.
That's right.
4 PM, 5 PM.
It's good of you, John.
I don't care.
Where you going, Paul? 4 or 5?
Doesn't matter.
4 o'clock?
4 o'clock it is.
Let's try for 4.
We gonna continue?
June the 3rd,
Recess.
let me just recess.
June the 3rd at 4 PM.
Is that good with everybody, staff?
That clears you with all notifications, right, Mr. Turner?
Yeah, if we recess this.
If we recess this meeting, that gives us enough time for public notice, okay.
All right, can I get a motion to recess till June 3rd at 4 PM, right here at 5 West Main Street, in the Commissioners Boardroom?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Got a motion by Commissioner Bill, second by Commissioner Shields, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.